The voice in my head was calm, too calm for what just happened. 3 years of my life gone with a smile and a handshake. Ethan Cole, that's me, 29, software engineer. The kind who stayed late to fix everyone else's bugs. I believed loyalty mattered. Turns out that was my biggest mistake. Across the table sat Mark Daniels, the senior VP of operations, slick hair, expensive watch, fake empathy. The kind of man who shook your hand while secretly deleting your access codes. Ethan. He said with that rehearsed HR tone, "It's not personal. The company's restructuring. Your position has been made redundant." I looked at him, really looked. His tie was red, his eyes were cold, and behind him, 2 interns were watching through the glass wall. They looked at me like I was already history, so I said quietly, "You're keeping the new guy, right? The one who still needs help compiling the mainframe build." Mark's smile flickered. "We need fresh energy," he replied, standing up. "You'll land on your feet." Then came the laughter, not from him, but from the others as I walked out. Jason, the project lead who took credit for half my work, whispered something I didn't catch. The room erupted. My badge clicked red as I swiped it at the exit, locked. Security had already cut my access. Outside, the winter air bit my face. I looked up at the company sign, Strat Edge Technologies, a place that built its empire on code I had written from scratch. And in that freezing moment, something inside me changed. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something deeper, a quiet, burning realization. They didn't fire me because I was redundant. They fired me because they thought I was replaceable. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know, was that the entire operating license for their core system was registered under my name. The wind cut across the parking lot, carrying the sound of their laughter behind me. I smiled for the first time that day. "Go ahead," I whispered, "laugh while you can." The first sign came months before they fired me, but I was too blind to see it. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that starts with burnt coffee and too many unread emails. Mark, the VP, had called for an urgent strategy meeting. The entire software division was there, 30 people crammed into a glass conference room that smelled like stress and cold pizza. Mark was pacing in front of the whiteboard. "We're restructuring to increase efficiency," he announced. "That means promotions, new responsibilities, and some difficult decisions." Everyone's eyes darted around. Mine found Jason, my teammate, and the guy who never wrote a full line of clean code in his life. He smirked like he already knew something I didn't. When Mark started handing out new assignments, Jason's name came first. "Jason," he said, "you'll be leading the core integration project. It's a big one, the foundation of our next release." My stomach dropped. That project was mine. I'd built its framework, designed the backend, even written the license protocols. Mark didn't even look my way. I forced a smile. Mark, just to clarify, the integration project, that's still running on my original architecture, right?" He nodded absently. "Yes, but we'll transition soon. Jason will take over maintenance." Jason leaned back in his chair, trying to look casual. "Don't worry, man," he said with a grin. "I'll keep your baby alive." The room chuckled. I didn't. That was the first red flag, the quiet kind that hides behind a joke. A week later, I noticed another. Late one night, I was still in the office, finishing a debugging cycle. That's when I saw 2 figures in Mark's office through the frosted glass. Mark and Jason. The lights were dim, but I could make out the shadows of their hands moving across a printed diagram. My diagram. My pulse kicked. I saved my work, walked past their door slowly, pretending to check my phone. Jason's voice slipped through the half-closed blinds. "Don't worry, once Ethan's out, I'll rebrand the license headers. No one will even notice." I froze mid-step. Mark's voice was lower, more cautious. "We can't risk him catching on. The board thinks it's company property." I walked away before I could hear the rest. That night I didn't sleep. The next morning, Mark called me into his office. He smiled like nothing happened. "Ethan, I wanted to thank you for your dedication," he said, sliding a small envelope across the desk. Inside was a $1.50 Starbucks card, my bonus. He leaned forward. "You've been a real asset. But let's make sure everything you're working on, the source code, the access keys, the backup data, stays properly archived. Company security, you understand." I stared at him. "Sure," I said slowly, "company security." But in my head, something snapped into focus. That wasn't a compliment. That was a warning. Over the next few weeks, my access started glitching. I'd log in and half my admin privileges would be gone. When I asked IT, they said, "Oh, Mark authorized the permissions update." Emails I'd sent to the board about the new software module, suddenly, undelivered. Jason stopped sharing project updates. He'd close his laptop every time I walked by. Then one afternoon, I overheard him talking to a new intern. "She thinks Ethan's a genius," Jason said, smirking. "I told her genius doesn't mean indispensable." The room laughed. Again, always laughter. I went home that night and stared at my monitor. On it, a digital folder labeled License Core Confidential. My name was still embedded in the software metadata, encrypted 3 layers deep, but if they were rebranding it, that meant they were trying to erase me. So I created a clone of the entire system on an external drive, quiet, untraceable, time-stamped, just in case. 2 days later, I found something I wasn't supposed to. Mark had left his office door unlocked during lunch. His computer screen was still on an open email thread with the subject line, "Transition Plan, Termination, :E." I scrolled just once. Jason's message was right below it. "He won't fight it. He's too naive. Let's just say it's redundancy." Footsteps echoed behind me. Mark's voice, calm, almost amused. "Looking for something, Ethan?" I turned slowly, forcing a smile. "No," I said, "just checking system logs." He smirked. "Good, keep up the hard work." I walked out without saying another word. But as I passed the glass hallway, I saw my reflection, calm face, steady eyes. But my fists clenched tight. The red flags weren't red anymore. They were on fire, and deep down I knew they were planning my fall. But what they didn't know was that I had already started building theirs. I still remember the day they called me in. No warning, no meeting request, just a Slack message: "Ethan, Mark needs you in the conference room, urgent." I knew what was coming. But knowing and feeling it are two different things. When I walked in, the room was colder than usual, glass walls, silver table, a faint buzz from the projector that no one turned on. Mark sat at the head, suit perfectly pressed. Beside him was Laura, the HR director, holding a thin manila folder. Jason leaned against the wall, pretending to scroll on his phone. Mark didn't waste time. "Ethan," he began, "as part of the company's ongoing restructuring, your position has been deemed redundant, effective immediately." I stood still. "Redundant," I repeated slowly, tasting the word. Jason didn't even look up. Laura slid the folder across the table. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Termination of employment, Ethan Cole. Reason, departmental consolidation. Access to company systems revoked upon signature." There was a line for my name at the bottom. I stared at it, then at Mark. "You said you'd need me for the next release cycle. I built the integration from the ground up, without the operating license." Mark cut me off. "The company owns all intellectual property produced under your employment." His tone was flat, rehearsed. "Legal," I clenched the edge of the folder. "That's not what the license agreement says. You approved the registration yourself." His jaw tightened. "Our legal team will handle it." Jason finally looked up. "Don't make this messy, man. It's business, not personal." Then he smirked. "You'll be fine. You're smart, just not essential." Something inside me cracked. Not rage, not yet. Just a deep, hollow disbelief that people you helped, People you trusted could smile while cutting you down. As I turned to leave, something on Mark's screen caught my eye, an open email thread. At the top, in bold, product launch announcement, Strat Edge OSV 2.0. Below it, a bullet point. New proprietary license integration developed by Jason Reed. I froze, my name erased. My code rebranded, that was it. The core betrayal wasn't just firing me. It was stealing everything I built and putting Jason's name on it. Outside, I walked the same hallway I'd walked every morning for 3 years. Every reflection in the glass panels looked different now, colder, darker. As I reached my cubicle, I noticed my monitor still on. The system was locked out, but one window was frozen shut down just long enough for me to see it. License verification, registered owner Ethan Cole, a flicker of proof, the last trace before they wiped me clean. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo, and emailed it to my personal account. It was small, but it was something. I left the building quietly, no shouting, no scene, just silence, heavy and final. But once I reached the parking lot, the silence broke. Jason's laughter, that same arrogant laugh, echoed from behind the tinted glass. He was showing something on his phone to the interns, probably my termination notice. They laughed too. I stood there for a long time, staring at the reflection of the company logo in my car window. Strat Edge Technologies. A name built on my work. My sleepless nights. My code. The anger hit me all at once. Hot, pulsing, alive. I slammed my hand against the steering wheel, hard enough to make the horn blare. Redundant, I whispered. You think I'm redundant, and my mind was already moving faster than my heart. Every line of code, every access key, every system dependency, I knew it better than anyone alive. They'd stolen my work, but I still held the key that made it run. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in front of my computer, eyes burning from the blue glow, scrolling through backups, contracts, old messages, everything I had ever sent or saved. And then, buried deep in a forgotten folder, I found it. The original software registration certificate, signed and time-stamped, proving legal authorship. My name, my signature, my property. I stared at it for a long time, the soft hum of my computer filling the silence. Then I whispered, almost to myself, they have no idea what they just started. The day after they fired me, I couldn't move. Not physically, I mean mentally. The walls of my apartment felt smaller. The silence was louder. My phone buzzed every few minutes, friends asking if I was okay, recruiters offering entry-level jobs I was overqualified for. I didn't answer any of them. I sat on the couch in yesterday's clothes, the termination letter on the table in front of me. The words blurred every time I looked at them. Your position has been made redundant. Redundant. That word echoed like a hammer in my skull. It wasn't just a job they took. It was everything, my work, my name, my purpose. By nightfall, the anger was gone. All that was left was emptiness. I felt erased. I opened my laptop out of habit more than anything else. When the login screen appeared, I just stared at it. My reflection in the screen looked nothing like me, tired eyes, rough stubble, and a man who didn't look like a fighter anymore. Then something blinked on the screen, an email notification, subject line, auto backup completed Strat Edge license archive. I clicked it. Inside was a single file attachment, a scheduled auto backup from the day before my access was revoked. I hadn't even realized it had triggered. When I opened it, there it was, the full code, every script, every subroutine, and the license key. Mine still under my digital signature. I leaned back, breathing slow. For the first time in days, my hands stopped shaking. That's when I heard my phone buzz again, this time, a new message from Jason. No hard feelings, bro. Business is business. You'll thank me one day, winking face. I just stared at it. Then I laughed, not out of humor, out of disbelief. That fake grin emoji felt like gasoline on an open wound. My laughter turned into something else, something sharper, colder. It wasn't madness. It was clarity. That was the moment, the defining one. Everything inside me shifted. They didn't just fire me. They declared war. The next morning, I woke up early before sunrise. No alarm, no reason to rush, just purpose. I looked in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see a victim. I saw someone who knew exactly how to destroy the system he'd built. Because he was the one who built it. The dark circles under my eyes, gone. The slouch in my shoulders, straightened. The fear, burned out, replaced with something quieter, control. I made coffee, black and strong, sat at my desk, and opened a new project folder. The title, redundant. Exe. Every keystroke was calm, deliberate. No rage, no panic, just precision. For the next several hours I rewrote pieces of code, subtle enough that no one at Strat Edge would notice until it was too late. It wasn't sabotage, not yet, just seeds. Hidden strings that would give me silent access to every system they ran. And as I worked, I replayed every moment in that conference room. Every smirk, every laugh, every fake apology. Each one fueled the next line of code. At noon, my mother called. I almost didn't answer, but something in me softened when I saw her name. "Ethan," she said gently, "I heard what happened. I'm sorry, honey." I swallowed hard. "It's fine, Mom." "No, it's not," she said. "You've always been too loyal for your own good. Remember what your dad used to say." I paused. "What?" "If they burn your bridge, build a new one, and make sure it leads somewhere higher." I closed my eyes. That was it, the final piece. A reminder that revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about reclaiming control. That night, I sat in front of the screen again, the glow reflecting off my eyes. I opened their company website, looked at the About Us page, and saw Jason's face under the title, Lead Developer. For a second, I almost smiled, because I knew what he didn't, that every line of his new system still ran on my code. And that meant, no matter how far they went, they'd always be standing on ground I built. I whispered it quietly, but every syllable carried weight. "You took everything I gave you. Now I'll take everything you have." I closed the laptop, leaned back, and exhaled slowly. The fear was gone. The grief was gone. All that remained was purpose. They thought they erased me. They thought they buried me. But they just planted a seed. They have no idea what they just started. Ethan didn't wake up a mastermind overnight. Revenge, he knew now, wasn't a movie montage of sudden genius. It was patience, small correct moves stitched together until the pattern was undeniable. He started where everything started, the codebase. The backup he'd saved that night after the termination was his lifeline, an immovable truth that bore his name, timestamp, and legal signature. But truth alone wasn't enough. People could lie, delete, or bury it. He needed a plan that touched three things at once: proof, leverage, and optics. First, proof. Ethan copied the archive into 3 different formats and dispersed them across separate layers. An encrypted drive tucked in his old desk drawer, a secured cloud account under a burner email, and a printed notarized certificate hidden in a safety deposit box his mother kept in town. He called a trusted former colleague, Maya Patel, a freelance security analyst who owed him a favor years ago, and sent a discreet message. "Need help verifying signatures. Coffee, E?" The reply was immediate. "Tomorrow 9, bring everything." Second, leverage. If Strat Edge claimed ownership, Ethan needed a pressure point they couldn't ignore. He spent nights mapping the company's dependencies, vendors, clients, regulatory filings. He discovered contractual clauses in partner agreements that required proof of valid licensing for deployment and support. If he could show that Strat Edge's flagship product ran on software whose licensing was legally owned by him, partners could freeze integrations, auditors could open reviews, and investors would demand answers That domino path would be slow but unstoppable. Third, optics. Public sympathy mattered. He wasn't out for petty humiliation. He wanted a return to dignity and an undeniable correction of record. Ethan sketched how the narrative should unfold: quiet, factual, devastating. No melodrama, just evidence and consequences. He wrote a checklist: legal counsel, verified proof, whistleblower channels, and one dramatic reveal that would force the company to face the truth in public. While Ethan prepared, the company humbly strutted. Mark gave interviews about the bold restructuring and how Strat Edge was accelerating innovation. Jason posed in staged photos with the new product dashboard, smiling like a man who had rewritten history. Interns posted breathless LinkedIn notes, cheering their new leadership. The office smelled of fresh paint and triumph. Ethan watched them from the outside world like a surgeon reading a patient's chart. He set small traps to test their responses. He uploaded a harmless, reversible script into a forked version of their public demo. Nothing that would crash systems, but a tag that would call home to a server he controlled if anyone executed it. He wanted to see how quickly changes propagated and who noticed. The first run went unnoticed. The second triggered an IT ticket that mentioned an unexpected callback. A junior engineer traced it and wrote, "Suspicious external request. Investigating." He'd hoped for more noise, but even that single line was a pulse he could monitor. There were near misses. One late evening, while Ethan was in Maya's cramped office going through signature metadata, he felt heat rise in his chest. An email from an unknown Strat Edge address pinged his burner. The subject, Ethan Cole, discrepancies. He closed the laptop calmly, told Maya he'd get back to her after showing her one more header trace, and deleted the email from the server before any forwarding occurred. He realized someone was poking. That meant they were suspicious. It also meant he had to be 10 times quieter. Another near exposure came when Jason's assistant, a plucky woman named Claire, reached out via LinkedIn to a mutual old peer, asking innocently if anyone knew Ethan's current consulting status. The query looked casual, but Ethan recognized the pattern. A soft probe to see if he'd surfaced. He watched Claire's posts and offline movements for days, then staged a controlled reveal, a daytime coffee meeting with an actor friend who pretended to be an interested client. Claire saw it and posted a photo. The probe cooled. Small wins like that taught him who watched and how they watched. Ethan also aligned legal support. He contacted an IP attorney, Gordon Hale, who read the notarized certificate and said bluntly, "You've got authorship. It's defensible, but you need to be surgical if we go loud too early. Strat Edge will bury the evidence in counterclaims." Ethan agreed. Surgical was the word he lived by now. He built redundancies. For every document, there was a chain, original, notarized, verified by a third party, timestamped via public blockchain records, and sent in sealed packages to trusted recipients. He seeded copies with journalists he trusted under embargo agreements, and briefed a small circle of ex-colleagues who would back his technical claims publicly if needed. He didn't want allies who would talk. He wanted allies who would corroborate facts when the time came. Meanwhile, Mark celebrated. A product launch party rolled into an investor call where Jason gave a flawless demo. Ethan watched the live stream with his fingers folded, each slide reinforcing the urgency of his timeline. He could have crashed the call, exposed them in the moment, but Gordon's voice pulsed in his memory. Too early and you lose the narrative. Wait until the block can't be countered. The plan was not instantaneous vengeance. It was a pressure cooker. Build evidence, tighten legal screws, nudge partner concern, and reveal at the exact second when the company's house of cards began to wobble. On a rainy Thursday, when the office building lights dimmed in the late evening and Mark left for a celebratory dinner with investors, Ethan made his first explicit move. He logged onto the burner account and sent a single, tightly worded message to a senior technology officer at one of StratEdge's largest integration partners. The subject line read, "Urgent, license verification StratEdge OSV2, 0. Attached were redacted, notarized excerpts indicating registered authorship, and a timestamped note asking for an immediate audit of licensing documents." He didn't hit send without pausing. He pictured Jason's smile frozen when a partner called the company for answers. He pictured Mark's face in a boardroom with investors leaning forward. He imagined the ripple through the office he had left months ago. His finger hovered. Then, with the unblinking calm of a man who had rehearsed for this exact breath, he hit send. A small chime on his phone confirmed the message left his outbox. Outside, rain tapped the window like distant applause. Inside, Ethan sat very still and watched the tiny line of sent text blink on his screen. The first move was made. But the results? He wouldn't see them for hours, maybe days. He closed his laptop, looked at the notation on his wall where he'd written his mother's advice. Build a bridge that leads higher. He smiled, not with triumph but with an iron patience. Somewhere across town, a notification lit up on a CFO device. A glass of champagne paused midair. A rumor that had been quietly planted was now alive. Ethan switched off the lamp, held his breath, and waited for the first domino to fall. Rain slicked the glass walls of StratEdge Technologies, as if the building itself were sweating. Inside, laughter spilled from the top-floor boardroom, where champagne flutes glittered under LED lights. The big launch had gone perfectly. At least that's what Mark Daniels and Jason Reed believed. Ethan watched the live stream from a quiet cafe across the street. He sat by the window, hood up, laptop open, the reflection of Jason's self, satisfied grin flickering across his screen. To new beginnings, Jason toasted. Ethan whispered, to endings. Then he hit enter. The encrypted script he'd planted inside the partner verification system activated at the exact second. The company's servers synced with external clients. It wasn't a virus. It was truth, pure, unaltered, time-stamped proof that every StratEdge product license traced back to Ethan Cole. Within minutes, email alerts began to explode across inboxes. Urgent, license discrepancy StratEdge OSV2, 0. Across the street, the party faltered. Investors glanced at their phones. The CFO frowned. Jason froze mid-sentence. "Mark, we've got a problem," someone muttered. Mark waved it off. "Probably a server glitch." But when the big screen behind him refreshed, the company dashboard replaced its welcome banner with a single message in white letters. Verification failed, unauthorized license detected. A gasp rippled through the room. Jason's drink slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. Crystal splinters scattering like data fragments. "Who the hell did this?" he hissed. Mark barked orders. Shut down the feed, reboot the system. But every attempt rerouted back to Ethan's secure signature chain. Each reboot only displayed the same screen, this time with a line of code at the bottom. Property of E. Cole, registered May 14, U.S. Patent and Software Registry. The room went dead silent, then came the calls. First, from Tech Verify, the partner Ethan had alerted. Then from the ledger, the journalist holding the embargoed report. And finally from a government licensing bureau confirming that an audit, it was already underway. Mark's confident mask cracked. Jason's phone lit up with messages, hundreds of them. From forums, news outlets, and ex-employees sharing screenshots of Ethan's certificate. "This can't be real," Jason muttered, pale now. "He's bluffing. He has to be." Mark's voice shook. "If he owns the license, every deployment, every update we've sold is illegal." On the cafe table, Ethan watched the live stream switch from celebration to chaos. He didn't smile. His expression was calm, almost sad. He hadn't wanted to destroy them. He'd wanted them to see the truth. But destruction was part of the truth, too. His phone buzzed, unknown number. He answered. "Hello, Mark." The line was silent for a beat. Then, "Ethan, listen. There's been a misunderstanding. Let's talk." "Talk," Ethan said quietly. "You talked when you fired me. I listened. Whatever you think you're doing, you're hurting innocent people. Employees, investors, they'll be fine." Ethan interrupted. "You, not so much. Ethan, please, we can compensate you. Share options, reinstatement, anything. You don't get it, Mark. You didn't just take my job. You stole my name off my work." He hung up. Across the street, Mark lowered his phone, staring at Jason, whose hands were trembling over his keyboard. "Can you fix this?" Mark demanded. Jason shook his head. "Every route points back to his signature. It's permanent." Mark slammed his fist against the table. The champagne bottle toppled, spilling gold liquid across the contracts. The room smelled of wine and panic. Then the newsroom alert flashed on the TV. Breaking: Strat Edge under investigation for intellectual property theft. Reporters' voices overlapped with camera flashes. Mark stumbled toward the window, looking down at the street below where journalists were already gathering. Jason leaned against the wall, face drained. "He played us," he whispered. Mark's eyes found the broken glass on the floor, his own reflection fractured in every shard. He pressed his hand to his temple, breathing hard. "What do we do now?" Jason asked. Mark didn't answer. The only sound was the rain tapping on the windows, relentless and quiet, like typing on a keyboard somewhere far away. Inside the cafe, Ethan closed his laptop. He looked out at the Strat Edge tower glowing with red emergency lights. In the window's reflection, he caught his own eyes steady, calm, no longer hollow. He took the USB drive from his pocket, the one labeled redundant. "EXE." He twirled it once between his fingers, then placed it gently on the saucer beside his empty coffee cup. Outside, thunder rolled across the city. He whispered almost to himself, "Justice served. System restored." No triumph, no applause, just the quiet relief of balance returning. Inside the boardroom, Jason and Mark stared at the darkened screen where the final message appeared before the system shut itself down for good. "Goodbye, Strat Edge." The monitor flickered once and went black. Silence, the kind that follows a storm that will never come again. The next morning felt unreal, like stepping into a city that had woken up from someone else's nightmare. Headlines scrolled across phones with the same blunt clarity. Strat Edge under audit. IP dispute rocks startup. Lead developer's license traces to former employee. The words stung, but they weren't aimed at me anymore. They were aimed at the house that had tried to erase me. I walked into a small cafe 2 blocks from my apartment, the place where I'd planned half my moves and drank too much bad coffee. Maya was already there, eyes rimmed from late nights, hands wrapped around a mug. Gordon sat with legal pads and a tired, satisfied smile. My mother joined us 30 minutes later, clutching a grocery bag and an old letter she found in a drawer, the one my father had written the day I graduated college. "Build bridges that lead higher." He'd meant it for my career, now it felt like a map. "You did it," Maya said, not as praise but as a fact that was finally visible. Her phone buzzed with messages from former clients who wanted statements. "People are calling. Ex-employees are posting their experiences. You gave them the space to speak." Gordon tapped the stack of notarized certificates. "You left no holes. Legally, they have a mess to clean up. Practically, investors are panicking. Partners are freezing deployments. They'll be negotiating settlements for months, and some suits will be expensive." He folded his hands. "Just be prepared for counter moves. They'll try to hurt reputations. Keep your story tight. Stick to the facts." I nodded. I had expected this. The long tail of paperwork, the courtroom calendars, the whispered threats filtered through lawyers. But between the suits and subpoenas, something more subtle returned to me: dignity. That quiet, human thing that had felt stolen sat back on its perch, brushing dust off my shoulders. Word spread in ways I hadn't anticipated. Former teammates reached out with apology messages that read like drafts of confessions. Some were short, "I'm sorry, Ethan." Others were longer admissions of pressure and fear. How Mark had spun narratives, how Jason had been coached, how the company culture rewarded smiling opportunism. A few offered help, some requested anonymity. Those who had been there when the laughter echoed down the glass hallway began to speak, one by one. Claire, Jason's assistant, who once posted that coffee photo, sent a private message that made me pause. "I didn't know the whole story," she wrote. "I'm so sorry. If you need a statement, I'll tell the truth." Her voice was small but honest. It meant more than 1,000 public apologies. Jason did not reach out. I read his statements through reporters' feeds. Defensive, cornered, and then gradually quieter as counsel restructured his message. Mark's face flashed on camera, a portrait of brittle composure. For the first time since I had ever seen him, his eyes carried genuine uncertainty. In interviews, he stumbled over phrases that used to roll off his tongue like a practiced speech. The corporate machine that had once polished him now revealed the cracks underneath. Investors convened emergency calls. Partners postponed integrations. The board announced an internal review and placed Mark on administrative leave, while a special committee examined licensing practices. StratEdge's stock, such as it was for a private company with public partners, took a hit in credibility. The company that had celebrated its rise now confronted a long, slow accountability. The media wanted spectacle. I gave them restraint. I answered questions slowly with facts. I refused to be baited into drama. When a morning show host asked if I was out for revenge, I shook my head. "No," I said, "I'm out for the truth." That distinction mattered. Revenge is noise. Truth is a record. Support came from unexpected corners. A former client called to say their team had nearly lost months of work because StratEdge's licensing mismatch had corrupted integrations. Another startup posted a public thread about vendor due diligence, amplifying the cautionary tale I had become. My inbox filled with messages from people who had been fired, sidelined, or dismissed. Stories that mirrored mine in tone, if not in detail. Each one felt like a small, collective wound finally acknowledged. Guilt did not fall only on Mark and Jason. It rippled outward into HR, into board members who had turned a blind eye, into colleagues who chose laughter over inquiry. Some expressed remorse, others defended the business reality that had justified their behavior. I listened without triumph. The goal had never been to humiliate people into ruin. It had been to align truth and consequence. There were practical wins too. Partners froze distribution until licenses could be clarified. Several contracts were renegotiated with clauses that now recognized individual authorship more carefully. Gordon worked on a settlement structure that would protect my rights and ensure StratEdge could no longer claim authorship without proper attribution. I'd been offered meetings with investors curious about ethical practices, and with a small consortium of startups interested in licensing transparency. I was surprised at how many doors a defended name could open. And then, the smallest, most human moment, a message from an old mentor, a CTO at a mid-size firm who had once refused to hire me because you'd outgrow us. He sent a link to a job posting with the line, "Lead architect, build from the ground up." No wink, no pressure, just an offer. He wrote, "No redundancies here. We build what lasts, if you're interested." I closed the message with a slow breath and felt my chest unclench. By evening, StratEdge had issued a corporate statement that read like a legal apology and a promise to cooperate. In the glass tower across town, lights blinked on and off, an awkward choreography. Jason's LinkedIn profile quietly reverted to earlier roles as his lead developer. Title was pulled pending inquiry. Mark resigned from the VP role pending the outcome. citing the need to focus on the company's best interest. Resigned. A word heavy with consequence. I stood at the window of my apartment that night, looking down at the square where protesters had gathered during the day, former employees, friends, and locals holding signs that read, "Credit where it's due and fair work matters." It felt strange to be the subject of banners and chants. I was always suspicious of spectacle. But seeing others stand up, not for me, but for principle, made the whole thing more than personal. It felt like a small correction in a larger system. I thought of the early days when I bugged late into the night, fingers cramped and coffee gone cold, when Jason misattributed a subroutine in a slide deck and Mark looked the other way. I thought of my father's letter in my mother's hands and the quiet way she said, "You were brave." Bravery wasn't loud. It was the stubborn choice to place truth ahead of fear. In the weeks that followed, legal wheels turned. There were mediated conversations, settlements that required public acknowledgments, and clauses that ensured future credit could not be stripped. StratEdge restructured its IP policy and brought in auditors to oversee practices. They released a public correction that listed contributors and noted ownership where it belonged. No press release could rewind the past 3 years, but it could ensure the record reflected truth. One evening, long after the storm, I walked past the StratEdge building on my way to meet a friend. The sign above the lobby caught the streetlight familiar, professional, now just another name. A group of interns were loading into the building, laughing about a new coffee machine. Life, stubborn and ordinary, went on. I remembered the first line I heard the day they fired me, the laughter that echoed down a glass hallway. It had felt like a verdict then. Now it sounded like a memory that no longer carried power. I sat on a bench nearby and took out the small USB labeled redundant. EXE. I looked at it, a small, unremarkable object that had held the pivot point of everything. I slipped it into my pocket. And then I said something out loud, not to anyone in particular, but to the city that had watched and to the quiet inside me that had carried the work. They laughed when they fired me, but they never knew I held the key. My voice was steady. The line was not a threat. It was closure. Now I want to ask you, the person watching this story, have you ever been betrayed, dismissed, or made to feel small by people who should have known better? Drop your story in the comments. Tell us how you found the key to your own dignity. If this story hit a nerve, share it with someone who needs to know they aren't alone. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and about standing up, hit subscribe and join the conversation. Because sometimes the quietest people build the bridges that lead the highest.